There you go. It works now. How are you guys doing this morning? I'm sorry if I get emotional up here. I don't know. The Lord just has my heart set on missions. And I want to say, one, I apologize for not being able to give you as much content throughout the whole time I was gone, just for various reasons. But it is what it is, and I'm working on getting you more content. And I also want to thank you. I want to thank you for supporting me along this journey, one, financially, but two, for also praying for me throughout this journey. Because the whole time I was gone, believe it or not, I was only homesick 2 days. That was it. And I know I had people that would text me every so often, or when I did get the post, I'd see comments, and it would always lift my spirits when I was going through hardship. But this past year has definitely been life-changing. I mean, not just for me, but for so many around the world. I saw many come to salvation. I saw many broken people, many hurt people, many people that had no hope. Everywhere I went. I mean, some people didn't know where they were getting their next meal. Some people were 8 years old and raising their brothers and sisters because their parents were dead. And I've been thinking about what to talk about while I got my time to speak, because there's so many stories, there's so many things I could tell you, but I just don't have time for all of it, and I'm still comprehending everything I went through and saw. But even though through the darkest of places, through the suffering, people were brought hope, and eternal hope. They weren't brought a hope that is going to go away. Because when you receive Christ as your Lord and Savior, this world becomes a temporary place. These people got a hope that when they do pass, or even while they do here, they have a purpose now as they're believers in God. And they have an eternity with the Lord. Also, I got to be a part of some fairly special things, but while I was gone, I think one of the biggest things I saw was the heart that God has for all people around the world. He loves all people. And one thing that I really sat on was, I saw this in a book, and I'm like, this is so true. It says, missions is not about us, but about bringing glory to God. Like our lives, it's not about what we do. It's about glorifying God. It's about bringing the glory of God to other people so they can experience this. They can have a chance to see who God is and how much He does love them. And that's what I got to do. I got to, thankfully, I had extra money when I left in Africa. I was able to buy 200 Bibles in their language for people who didn't have Bibles. Or if they did, they had them in English, but they couldn't read them because a lot of them can't speak English. I was able to be one of the first Americans, or the first group of Americans to step in on land in the jungle of a town called Coralpec in Guatemala. But it was hard, Through this journey, I got to realize that I can't give these people what they need physically. I can't meet everybody's needs. But like I said, the one thing I can give them is the hope of the Lord. I want to share a few short, brief testimonies. So they're both actually from Guatemala. Guatemala definitely holds a special place in my heart, and so does Swaziland. They all have their good things and bad things. But when I was in Guatemala, on Thursdays, we did this thing called activation. So there are actually staff with my organization who lived there, and on Thursday mornings we would have like a teaching of some sort, and then in the afternoon we'd go out and do whatever it was. So that day was actually on evangelism. So they're like, okay, we're gonna go out this afternoon. Evangelism, I found out, is my favorite. Like, evangelism is my favorite, even though it's very hard at times. So our whole squad went out, about 45 of us, and I don't know if any of you met my friend Luke that was here the other day, but I told Luke, I'm like, bro, let's not go where everybody else is going. Like, let's go the opposite way of everybody else. And a lot of them walked to the park and walked to like a coffee shop and stuff. But Luke's like, let's go down the alley. Let's go down there and find the alley to go down, which we're not supposed to, but like, we'll be good. I'm saying, okay. So we start walking, and I'm like, let's go down this one. He says, all right, we'll go down. We start walking down this alley, and we see this first person we see is this lady. She's sitting here like crying, and then I'm like, let's go talk to her. And Luke's like, no, we're not her. Like that would be weird to like meet two guys walking up to this woman in the alley, but he's like, not her. And then we keep walking, and I see these two guys on a ladder, and he's like, let's go talk to them. I'm like, no, not them. Like let's just keep walking. So we keep walking, and we see this little boy. He's probably 8 years old, sitting there just holding his little brother. So we're both like, okay, let's go talk to him. So neither one can speak Spanish. You know, I did not learn any language while I was gone. So we talked to this kid for an hour and a half through Google Translate, like sitting there, just getting to know him, you know. Well, we ended up talking about the gospel, and he had never heard the gospel before. So we explained the gospel, and we're like, do you want to become a believer? And he's like, yeah. He's like, how do I do it? So then we're like, we literally said the prayer through Google Translate, and like, just like say this and actually believe it, like, and leave your life for it. He's like, okay, pretty much like, okay. So then after that, we're like, do you have a Bible? He's like, no. Why would I have a Bible? So we're like, we're going to go find you a Bible. So he goes back to his house, and we're like, we're going to be back, okay? So we're in this town called Paramos, and we're like, where are we going to find a Bible at? We don't know. So we start walking and asking, and we didn't have any luck. Well, this one barber in his barber shop saw us. He's like, what are you guys looking for? And we told him. He was the only guy working there until he left the barber shop and took us all the way across town to buy a Bible. And it was at some pharmacy. Like, you would have never known where to get it. So we even offered to buy him one, but he's like, no, I got one. Like, I'm good. So we ended up getting 2 Bibles, walked all the way back across town, and gave the Bible to this little boy. And gave him one for, there's another brother he had, but he wasn't there. And like, he was just even in disbelief that we even came back, you know. But it's like, wow, like, look at the Lord providing there, even for us in that circumstance. But more importantly, like, seeing a kid come to know God, like, that's the best thing. And then the other thing was when I was in the jungle. So they tell us while we're in Guatemala, like, we have 43 people went with me, but we were in teams. So for 2 weeks, we were all going to split up. So we get them in these cars, about 10 of us in about 3 or 2 cars, but there's probably about 15 of us in about 3 cars. So we were all pretty crammed with all of our stuff in there too, if you can imagine. But we ride 10 hours away to like the other side of Guatemala to this town called Petén, and we were there for 2 weeks. But then like, we're gonna take you into the jungle for 4 days. Like, you're gonna be the first Americans that they've ever met. Like, they think we're gringos. They call Americans gringos there. But they're like, they think we're white people, but they haven't met y'all yet. So getting into the jungle, it was a challenge of itself, because we were riding in this truck, and I was scared to death, because I mean, normally I'm a pretty safe person, but I was sitting like on above the bed of the truck because all of our stuff was in there, like just holding on, riding down the road. Well, then we get going into the jungle, and our truck gets bogged down. So me and a few other guys had to figure out, like, okay, how are we gonna get this truck unstuck? So we just go as far as we can go, and then we have to hike like 2 miles through the mud, and then the like head of the town, I guess, like the I guess you call it like the teacher, mayor, I don't know. He meets us where we're supposed to be meeting at, and takes us to this school. And what I mean by school is like shack with dirt floors, about 3 tables, and a tin roof with holes in it. And that's where we slept. We slept on the dirt floor for the next 3 days, washed in rivers, cooked all of our food over a fire. But it was fascinating, like these people, like they were just looking at us at first with concern, like, who are you? You know? But even when we got there, I was so hungry, and we made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and I got 2. But I saw one of the little kids looking at me, so I went and gave him one of my sandwiches. But he took it, and he went and shared with his friends. And they said he's never had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in his whole life. Like, they don't even know what that is. Like, they live off the land. So, I don't know, those were just 2 stories from my trip that I was like, wow. And then I have a point, it says, I heard this all the time. God doesn't always call the equipped, but he equips the call. Because everywhere we go, I'm like, I'm not equipped for this. I'm not ready for this. I don't know what I'm doing. But I had to learn through this trip to walk in a lot of boldness and trust the Lord. So I put, God always provides the gifts, tools, and resources we need to do his work. It was amazing because not like every time I thought, oh, I don't know what to do, like something always happened or somebody always gave us what we needed. Like one day, my ministry host was flying. He was actually flying to America or somewhere. But he's like, you're going to have to get the ministry on your own today. And it was 6 miles. And we're like, okay, we can take the bus at the first mile. But then we have to figure out how to get there. So we hitchhiked. We started walking. And this person picked us up on the side of the road and drove us to where we needed to go. I'm like, look at that. The Lord is providing a way. And then through this, I'd say personally for me, I learned like what it means to surrender and sacrifice in a deeper way and trust God in a deeper way for myself. Like I grew along this journey spiritually as well, and I had to do things that I wasn't comfortable doing. I had to give up my comfort, matter of fact. I had to learn to walk in boldness. I had to surrender relationships with family and friends for a while to pursue the calling that God has on my life. You know, it's like we think like, or I was going through this season realizing like, okay, like I am actually putting God first in my life for what he's called me to do. And just looking at the surrender and sacrifice I had to make for that, it always became more and more and more, you know. And then the beautiful thing that I saw, or that I loved, was working with churches around the world, because I learned that we all serve the same God, but all of our worship looks different, you know. And the God calls us like we are the church. You know, we are supposed to go out. We are supposed to do missions, starting in our community, but also going to the ends of the earth. And I want to share a quick Bible verse with you. I'm sorry for taking too long, but
you can take it up with your mama, buddy.
It says, Romans 10, verses 14 through 15. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. And like my heart has been set on fire for people and seeing people come to Christ, or just get to encounter God, because he brings that true hope. But it's even fascinating, like how many people don't know? Like how many people don't know the gospel? And I realized how important it is for people to know, or like that he's the only thing we need in life, because in Africa, I wondered how these people had nothing, but were some of the most joyful people I'd ever met. It was because the ones that were joyful had the Lord. They relied on the Lord for everything. And the beauty about missions is through missions, you get to share the gospel, and you give people an eternal hope into something far greater than the things of this world. And even while I was going, I caught myself. I would get caught up in just going through the motions at times. Like even in ministry, I'm like, Lord, help me be sincere with this. Like, help me continue to walk where it is you're calling to me and do the purpose that you've sent me here to do, instead of just showing up. And I feel like people in the ministry, people in general, I feel like sometimes in life we just go through the motions of life, you know, get up, do whatever, and be done. Or even if it is like sometimes sharing the gospel, like we need to take heart and mean it and do it and be willing to go where God calls in our everyday life. I want to share some statistics with you. So there are 7,385 unreached people groups in the world, still to this day, that have never heard the gospel. That is 42.3% of our population and 3.4 billion people that have never heard the name of Jesus. And that fascinates me. That gives me a hunger and a desire to, like, they need to know. They need to know. And I'm like, we have an opportunity in our generation for all these people to be reached now with the technology that we have, with everything we have, that there's access to get to these places. And I've heard stories of, like, even right now in the Middle East, a lot of people are coming to Christ because they see in Jesus in their dreams. It's crazy, but my question to you is he worthy of it all? As believers, we have to count the cost of following Christ, like it says in Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. To live for Christ and to die is gain. We have to die to ourselves every single day and be willing to share the gospel with people, to live our lives for the Lord, but also accept the call to wherever it is he calls us, because somebody's got to go. Somebody's got to tell. And God wants to use us all. And that's all I have for now. I'm trying to get my mama time.
Okay, I plan a 4-week series to speak on. I was going to try to get that in 1 hour, but my time is limited, so now I'm going to not do the 4-week series. So first of all, I am not a public speaker, I am not a world traveler, and I am not a missionary. But here I am today speaking publicly about a mission trip that took me halfway around the world. I have a controlling personality. I always am on plan A. And when it falls through, there's always plan B and C ready. Well, as you can see, when Matt came home one day and said he decided that he was going to go on a 9-month mission trip with people I didn't know, and the group could not provide me any physical address as to where he was going to be, that really disrupted me as in who I was at the core. It was the moment in my life when my faith was tested. Do I really allow God to direct my path accordingly, or do I call on God when my plans fall through? God used the one thing in my life that he knew would test my faith, my child. I would always say, I trust God with my children, they are his. He also used the one thing in my life that he knew would push me to travel such distances to take such a trip. A mission trip to Swaziland, South Africa. When Matt decided he was going on this trip and serve as a missionary, we were told that this decision would not just impact his life, but would forever change ours. This experience tested my faith. It provided me a different lens to view life through, and it changed my perspective on my own life. The mission trip began for me long before Matt left. I was preparing emotionally and mentally for about 1.5 years. The front end of the trip taught me much about myself. Like I said, my faith was tested for sure. For those of you who have known me throughout the years and watched me parent my children, if I could have bubble wrapped them, I would. I was a helicopter mom trying to disguise myself differently. I remember Dalton came to my house one day and I was trying to make him a sandwich, and everybody else, and when I turned around, he was saying, but I caught him, but that's okay. I was trying. But the 2 questions that I was asked more than anything else was, how in the world can you let him go? And are you not afraid? I was uncharacteristically fearless, 90% of the time. Friends, that was not me. That was definitely God. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but the power of love and self-discipline. There is a healthy fear. For example, You should not jump off of a high cliff because you probably will not make it back. You need to stay away from the edge. That's good fear. But fear and distrust of life and people isn't from God. When we say yes to fear, we are saying no to a meaningful life. I would ask myself the other 10% of the time, and my mentors, you know who you are we crazy? Should we not let him go? Have we lost our minds? I didn't say that to the people that I knew already felt that way, because they were not going to guide me in the right direction. I held steady to my word that these were God's children, and I was determined not to interfere with what I knew God had called on Matt's life. Psalms 127:3-5 says, "Sons and daughters are like arrows to be released." As a parent, we know that this is the cycle of life. Our children are not ours to keep, but to help them grow in ways to empower them and bring light into a dark world. The time had come, as Matt's mama, to let him go. With all parents and children, this happens at different times, but we have to look at this as success and not a loss. And I'm here today. They've spoken to you about mission trips and how they've touched the world and how the mission trips change the heart of people who we are seeking. But I want to tell you how the mission trip changed my heart. It forced me to look at life through a different lens. You know, once I entered my 40s, I started noticing that I just could not read small print. So I took a quick ride to Walmart, got me some little sporty readers, and my sight was restored. In much of the same ways readers correct our vision, God can put our lives in. God can correct our spiritual vision. This is through faith. Maybe faith is a corrective lens that we put on to see life clearly. As we move forward with Matt on this mission trips and planning ours, faith isn't hit or miss, it's a lens that guides us, and we have to choose to look through it. We also look at life through a worldview lens as well, and this is where the mission trip I served on had a direct impact on my life. The views impacted my value of people, life in general, and the way I felt that I should spend my time. While I was on the mission trip, I experienced things and quickly began to change my worldview almost instantly. It allowed me to see things differently and in turn directly affected my perspective. Perspective is a point of view in understanding or judging circumstances, and it is the number one battle in our mind. If I have binoculars here, and I give one, and you pick up the binoculars and you look through one side, and someone else picks up the binoculars and they look through the other side, some of you are going to see things very close up, and some of you are going to see things very far away. You are convinced you are right, because that is your perspective based on your experience. Traveling to Africa was not a trip I ever considered taking, nor did I believe I would ever have the courage to go. But I looked through the lens of faith and went. My perception of this trip itself, the mission trip, and seeing Matt quickly changed. I was not anticipating the mission trip itself as much as I was anticipating seeing Matt. What I was not prepared for was how seeing the world from a new worldview lens was going to change my perception of life and the trip itself. The most important experience was not gradual. The change was intense and emotional and affected me almost immediately. For example, my perception of the trip and seeing Matt, I couldn't wait to see him and hear all about his experiences and about his plans for what was next. I couldn't wait to share my wisdom and my excitement about what next was going to look like. Well, this is what it looked like. Matt had established a family that he was very excited for us to meet, and he was also excited to tell us about his experience. He was raised safety first, fun next. Always That was what I told them every time they walked out the door, every time we went anywhere. Don't jump, wear your seatbelt, don't ride in the back of the truck, and don't ride with strangers. He was my cautious child. He was the clean child. He was my child that you would describe his personality as you don't color outside, that he would never color outside of the lines. That was my perception when I arrived. Well, his life experiences had changed as well as his perspective. He had jumped off of a cliff or two, rode on the back of the truck and on top of a few vehicles, squeezed 8 people into a 3-person tuk-tuk, and he hitchhiked, and he was dirty. I mean to tell y'all, he was dirty. I was mortified. I thought he knew all of these parents were coming. He has never met these people, and he is dirty. He had 3 days worth of dried sweat on the armpit of his shirt. It was like crunchy when you touched him. And on top of all that, he was prepared for me to come to parent. His guard was up. He was not nearly as excited for me to share my wisdom about his future as he was to tell me his plans. Another way my perception changed is the children. I was so excited about the children. They were orphans, and I knew they were going to need my love, and I was going to play with them. I'm making this quick, okay? I was going to play with them, and I was going to do everything to pour joy into their little lives. The orphans were loved, and they were given attention, and they were full of joy. That was not the perception I had. They didn't live in an orphanage like I thought. They had a family. The family we visited was a mom/aunt raising 7 children. She was 30 years old. 2 of them were her biological children. 5 of them were nieces and nephews, and their parents had died. The children were loved and cared for, not to our standards, but to the best of their ability. These children were so joyful, they were loved, and something happened that shook me to the core. I thought that these children were lacking love. But they were lacking the bare necessities of life. The care point that we were at fed these children 1 meal a day. And they would come to get food. They had to have their own bowl. And they would come walking from fields everywhere with their little bowls in their hand. And when I say children, I'm talking about hip babies. Like these 2-year-old babies we would not let in the backyard by themselves. And I was worried. I was like, oh my gosh, Brian, an animal's going to get them. Something's going to happen to them. And he's like, Jennifer, this is their world, and that is not what they're worried about. And he was right. Because the children in the church had found out, in the local school, had found out the missionaries were here. And they came. An influx of children. The grandma, Go-Go, was the lady that would cook. And Brian and another missionary on the trip, they were scooping food into these little bowls. And they realized the food was running short, and the line was not getting any shorter. And they started rationing. It was terrible. We ran out of hot food. We had these children begging for them to scrape the burnt rice off of the bottom of the pot. I could never have imagined that unless I experienced it. It was heart-wrenching. We struggled to keep our emotions together. Fortunately, we had brought some fruit into town that we were going to give, and we were able to give those children fruit. But the most touching thing was the children that did have food in their bowl. Now, let me just say, we're going to go back. When I was a little girl, I can remember the videos from Ethiopia of the little children sitting, and they were eating with their hand, and there was flies all around them. Okay, this is exactly what it looked like. And they had their own little bowls. And these little children who got 1 meal a day, when they realized we ran out of food, they started sharing their food with each other. I went from thinking these children needed love and joy in their life to just knowing that hope was simply what they needed. There was laughter and dancing in the air, and it made me to reflect on ourselves and our lives. And my thought jumped back to Matt's dirty shirt. He said, Mama, do you see how dirty they are? We wear the same clothes every day so that they don't feel different or they don't feel less than us. What a lesson. And that made me reflect directly on home. The trip gave me the opportunity to see the world in a way that different than what I believed or understood. Seeing the world from a different lens gave me an overall different perspective. And I still don't know how to explain how the experience changed my perspective on life and home fully. What I know is it took me a minute to adjust. I had low tolerance for people when I came back. I had a low tolerance for myself. I mean, the things that I knew that bothered me before, I just thought, how shallow. My air conditioner has been broken for 2 days at home. And I'm like, you know what? We're camping in South Africa. You know, these people live like this every day. We're not going to complain about the broken air conditioner. Anyway, ways my perception changed was when Matt left, South Africa was halfway around the world. Now, Matt says, anywhere around the world is only a day and a half away. Being a teacher, it really changed my perspective because this is my mission field. As teachers, we see students in other countries. Education is a privilege, and to our children, education is an expectation. And we get very frustrated with these children because they do not value what we are doing for them. We feel frustrated. But I started thinking, you know, maybe education is, something that they feel like they should automatically get. But I think that they probably value love and attention. When I went to Africa to pour into those children is what my children here at home would see as a privilege because a lot of them do not get it. Our English language learners, I look now and I think they're just one step from where we just were. Living with not the bare necessities. We look at them as children who are adjusting to our society and learning our language, when in reality, they're escaping what I just saw. Another way that my perception has changed is community. Before this trip, and I've told many of you this, I viewed community as a group of people that share a common cause and come together. And I also realized that community is more than that. Community is people that truly love you and support you. When we were preparing for this mission trip, as soon as we heard about it, Miss Pat McGugan called. They were going to Miss Wanda's. The men's group was wanting to help. The youth, everybody in the church was involved, but not just our church, but community churches. But what I want to say before I close is, Matt says that you do not have to be the equipped to leave. We are not always equipped, but what I want you to know is you are always equipping someone. Whenever I dropped my children off to kindergarten and child development, it was all on the same day. The worst day of my whole life so far. It was awful. I can remember saying dropping them off to college would not be as bad. Miss BB called me at 10 o'clock that morning because I was crying when I left school to tell me the children were okay. She really was equipping me to survive. I guess she knew I knew my children were okay. I mean, Stacy and Trella probably remember it. It was absolutely terrible. I was very upset because my children were not equipped for me to drop them off without me being there to support them. But when the day came to drop them off at college and the day came to put Matt on that bus and send him to Georgia for a mission trip, I had peace. I was not afraid because they were equipped. Not only had I equipped them, but our community equipped them. We are equipping people. We are on the mission field right here. You are equipping people because everybody is watching. When a 7-year-old shares their food with somebody, they're equipping their friends. When you are going through wonderful things in your life to be celebrated, you are equipping people because we are watching. When you're going through marital problems, struggling with loss, raising children, you feel like you're at rock bottom, you are equipping people. And I just want to thank you all for everything you've done to equip me and Brian for this part of our life. And I also want to thank you for everything you do to equip the children and the youth in this church, because they are the mission field right here in our community and in our school, and you are the mission field to each other. But I do want to close in saying this: the mission trip touched our heart in such a way. Like I said, I'm not a missionary, but it sparked me to come home and be a missionary in my Africa. It gave me a different perspective for my children, for my students, for the children here in this church, and for each other. And if we would love to plan a mission trip, we've talked to Charles about it, just not for y'all to become international missionaries, but for you to see the world through a different lens and maybe be sparked and grow your missions where you are. And if this is something you feel like you would consider or like to do, we don't have anything definite planned yet. We're just trying to get some ideas as to who would be interested, if anybody would be interested, and make a plan. We would plan something that would be reasonable and obtainable for everyone to go to if they wanted to go. But I want you to think about what we've all said. I want you to pray about it, and I want you to know that not only will it impact the people's lives that you go to, it'll impact your life and the people's around you. Thank you for all y'all done. And my series just didn't last 4 weeks.
Brian, where is he? Hey, come on. Brian's going to sing. This is our invitation. If you want to come and pray, do